planning rolled into how they enter into a marketplace. Your strip centers and what that happens, and your local business owners as they're trying to figure out how they expand. So we're building that nationally. But to your point, if it didn't happen overnight, how I got into this industry is I come from humble beginnings. I was self-educated for the majority of my younger life. Neither one of my parents graduated high school. And I got my start, believe it or not, and I was very humbled and a little bit surprising as I look back, but I got my start in the restaurant industry. I started stepping into leadership positions as a crew leader and then worked into management at your typical first job that you start around my generation, which is in fast food. And as I got into that, I got into actual general manager position when I was about 19 or 20 years old. And I could fix stores pretty quickly. But then I figured out what I think, business owner realizes in retail, which is it doesn't matter how great your operations are if you have a terrible location. So I ran into the location that I couldn't fix, and they had to close that store and lay off a lot of the employees that they couldn't put into other locations. And that really struck my interest in commercial real estate and also understanding that sector of business development and how important that is, regardless of how good your operations are.
So your retailers, particularly the retail ones, have pretty sophisticated models for their site location, from the demographic profile to and more the sort of the drive time and the sort of the social aspect and the mapping that they need to do. So did you really dig into the that type of analysis to help with your clients, or where did you find the right fit to pick and to help those clients to find those optimal locations and begin to optimize their portfolio?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to, and I do make a heavy amount of business consulting, right? So it comes down to your point, they're not like McDonald's doesn't just show up and say, hey, we're going to do 10 stores and we don't know where. There's a strategy towards it. So key questions that you always ask, regardless of what company it is you're representing, is who's your demographic? Are you a destination driven concept, or are you synergistic with particular co-tenants that need to be there? What is your main traffic generator for where you're going? And what's your prime way that people reach you? So some concepts only want to have a drive-through, some have pickup windows, some have, destination driven concepts where they just need something that's not in the most prime location, but lower rent and easy access. So any person that I'm working with, I figure out what's their main driving factor. And then I figure out who their demographic is. And I figure out also who their demographic is to hire, because that's a major factor too that I got to learn in restaurant management. Is there some areas that could make great sense for demographics for consumers, but then they're not going to have the employees that are their ideal workforce in that area. So those are some key questions that I'll look into. And then that goes into what you're talking about, to diving into the mapping softwares, the demographics, retail commercial real estate. From what I was told initially, which I'm stubborn, so I didn't believe it until now. And I'm like, okay, yep, you were right. You don't know what you don't know. But that is, retail is like one of the hardest specialties in commercial real estate to learn, because you have, and also to execute it, because you have to know how to read the mapping reports, how to read the void analysis reports, how to make sure that you're not cannibalizing the stores, making sure you know the traffic patterns, all those different factors. So we've got certain mapping softwares that we use, certain things we always take into account, whether we're doing tenant representation or landlord representation. The cool thing is once you know it, and you can replicate it in multiple states like we're doing right now.
Yeah, you hit on something that we should talk a little bit about, maybe take a deeper dive into, is that of all the commercial real estate sectors, whenever I talk to a retail agent, it will say to me, but retail is different.
Mhm.
And retail needs, and it does have in many, even the big companies, its own distinct brand, its own distinct sort of culture, service line. There are industry events like ICSC and structural components of it that help and create dynamics. And I think the unique, incredible opportunity of it is also that they're cookie cutter type locations that there's multiples of. So if
Mhm.
you're able to handle the services that you talk about and begin to represent a Chipotle or whoever it might be, you can do hundreds of them,
Mhm.
or dozens of them, depending on if you're local or as you're doing, you're building a national team to begin to represent, and they have great loyalty from the companies to their tenant reps in helping them find locations because they know how hard it is and how hard you have to work and how you need to know the nuances of the market. So maybe talk a little bit more about that type of relationship with those big companies that you represent, as well as some of the unique aspects and services that you need to provide from a retail site location
For sure.
service.
So for tenant representation, understanding those main things are key. But when it comes to those, they're typically on the national side represented by a real estate director. That real estate director, typically in the current model, goes and interviews an agent for each individual state that they see. And then they have to make sure that agent's working hard, doing what needs to get done, getting the site approval packages done in time, pulling the right demographics to get it done in time, able to not just pull what's on market, but pull what's off market, knowing how to properly work a deal from beginning to end, knowing how to do the mapping areas and the strategic planning. Because for these, you're not just going and finding a site, you're essentially consulting them of, okay, this is what your 10-year long rollout plan looks like. This is where you put store number 1, store number 2, store number 3. Here's how you time your stores to avoid opening everything up at the same time. This is where you pace your stores so you don't cannibalize yourself and pull away from one store that's doing well. It's an entire plan that you put together. You really operate at a different tier of sophistication than say just, and each one has their own challenges to it, but it's not just going and doing and negotiating a deal. You have to know all of that stuff and advise and put that plan together before you even get to figuring out what deal you want to pursue and executing in real estate negotiations at that point. So when it comes to these real estate directors, typically for franchises, they're going to oversee multiple different states, and they have to find somebody in each one of those states that knows that skill, that knows how to represent them, knows how to negotiate those deals, knows how to find those deals, knows how to put the mapping softwares, the tour packages, everything together in the right way. And with doing that, as soon as you can solve the problem in one state, knowing boots on the ground who can serve them in other states, it is a replicable process. So finding, and what I'm building is a national retail group where we use the same process in every single state with the boots on the ground knowledge of all of those sites, selections, the mapping, everything, so that the real estate directors don't need to go and find somebody different in each state. And since we're within the EXP group, we can operate cross-state lines, and we're not stuck to franchise requirements of sometimes these different big brokerages get tied into. What I can now say is, for instance, let's just use a Burger King, for example, right? I can say, okay, Burger King, you are rolling out in Idaho. Your real estate director for Colorado is the same person. Let's roll you out in Idaho and do the exact same thing with boots on the ground knowledge in Colorado. And now you don't need to talk to 2, 3, 4 different companies and get your site approval packages taught to each person in a different mapping software and a different reporting process. For this one, it's across the line, so everything's the same and you get it everywhere. I call it like basically franchising for franchises. We franchise the real estate site selection model so they get the same experience every single time that they're going into a place. For people that want to replicate this, though, once you learn retail commercial real estate, it's very similar. CC&R use restrictions, you need to know what those are in your shopping centers. You need to know where you can and cannot go when it comes to the use restrictions within the leases. The lease places that you land at, typically you got your breakdown of they want a drive-through pad site, they want to purchase, whatever that might be, all the way down to the line if you're doing retail leasing and shopping centers. There's certain uses that you should go after, certain ones that you shouldn't based on what's in there, and certain scripts that are replicable in each individual center. So I've got it down enough where I can drop an agent basically in any state and say, build this database, and this database, and immediately get them leads, and immediately get them tenant rep projects, or immediately get them people that are interested in their shopping center if they do it right. Once you know it, and it's easily replicated.
there's a lot in that. The one aspect I like to talk a little bit about is the whole world of franchising. And it's always a challenge, or with many companies, it's a challenge. You know, someone like McDonald's, it might not be because they control all the real estate, but with some franchise operators, they don't have the full control. They sort of have to work in tandem with their franchisee. It could be the franchisees leading the site location process and getting approval from corporate. It could be the corporates taking it down and who's signing the lease, what's the credit, all of that stuff. So what's the complexity of dealing with the franchise and some of the risks that the agents need to be aware of, and things that you need to manage when you have the type of multi-party transaction that a franchise brings?
Well, I mean, there's multiple, I mean, so many different risks involved into it, but a lot of times if you're dealing with the franchise, what I typically see is the franchisee is going to be the one that you work really in tandem with consistently with where do they want to land. They might have the rights to do 3 stores in that market, for instance, but how can they pace those stores and what economics can they pay personally for rent and building that space out, all of those other factors that impact their personal economics, because often, I'm not an attorney, but often they are the ones personally guaranteeing that lease. So they have to make sure that they're okay with it, and they're the ones paying for the build out often. So they have to make sure that they're willing and able and financially capable of performing in that lease. But where it gets more challenging is the franchisee typically will then, once they have an agreed upon offer, what have you, take that site and then bring it to the franchisor or the real estate director, and they are going to be the ones that corporate says yes or no on the site. So you might go all the way down the road, get an agreed upon deal, get everything good to go, and then have the franchisor say, no, we're not going to do this site. And you'll be stuck pulling a lot of different demographics, making the argument, making the case, putting the site approval package together, all of these different facets to make sure that the real estate director is able to get corporate approval so the franchisee can move forward. So that's a big factor that has to be taken into account in those site approval packages. I mean, there's a big reason why these big firms are the ones that typically represent these retailers. They're not something to balk at. They're not something that's easy. They're something that you really got to know your stuff. You got to know how to pull demos. You got to know how to pull so many different things, comps and everything else, that you have to really have a really dived in research department that knows how to do it. And you need to know how to properly articulate it, put those packages together.
Yeah, I think you've talked about multiple levels of decision making, and the state or the regional rep, and building the relationship at the regional level with the franchisor first. It sounds like, to get their confidence and trust, know their systems and processes so that you can get the approval and you can guide and recommend uh, to that franchisee better. So are you getting this the franchisor pointing you to the franchisee, or are you helping to find the franchisee? Or are you do you need to get hired twice? Are you hired by the company, or are you hired by because that's, or often the franchisees has a friend that's a commercial real estate agent. Even though you've got the corporate endorsement and the corporate support, you've got to fight that battle again to get the loyalty at the franchisee level.
I mean, I've been on both sides, so you hit the nail on the head. A lot of times you got to win the business twice. I've been on the side of getting hired by the franchisee, and then franchisor comes in and says, actually, no, we have a agreement with using this person as our master broker. You don't have the decision making for it. But I've also been on the other side where the franchisor says, hey, you're going to use this person, and the franchisee goes, no, we're not. We already are working with an agent. So I've been on both sides of it. I typically don't go find the franchisee that joins the company, because that's not my skill set to go and track that down. And it's only 24 hours in a day. But typically what I'll do is I'll talk to the franchisor first, see if they do have franchisees entering into the market, and then work with them. But I also take the approach with the franchisee of saying, hey, I know a couple sites that would be a good fit for you. Let me help you with renegotiating your lease, repositioning your stores, whatever that is to bring value. And that way I'm connected with both. The ultimate thing, a lot of times, is the main motivating factor, right? Is franchisors want successful franchisees. They want somebody that's producing sales, and someone that's a successful company, and somebody that maintains the brand. So if that franchisee says, I know someone who can do that for me, And here's the reason why. Franchisor typically will back up whatever best serves that franchisee. So it's making that argument as solid as you possibly can that you are indeed that person that can solve that problem and make those things happen.
So within EXP, we have a special opportunity with the business brokerage side. So to keep, while you don't do it, it's something to keep in mind for the rest of the group. Some might be aware, but with the business brokerage team, if you're dealing with a franchisor who's trying to enter a market, and part of the challenge for them is not just to find the site, but to find the right franchisee, is that there's a possibility to team up and get part of that transaction as well, and that opportunity as well. And
Very,
again,
very
there's so
valuable.
many layers to this. You can also, if it's a build to suit, there's a capital markets component to help raise the construction financing and then there's a net lease at the end and there's a chance to participate in that. So a lot of bites at the apple with the single tenant commercial retail leasing side, as well as it sounds like you're doing agency work as well, helping to fill centers. Are you helping to find locations for developers, or are you more engaged in just the leasing side of that?
It's heavily involved into, it's both, but for the development side of things, I find a lot of sites for developers because I know what active retailers there are in the market. Developers don't want to purchase the property or build a building really until they have that certainty that I can bring a tenant. And that same skill set ties into existing shopping centers and stabilizing those, whether that's for an investor or for someone trying to, flip it, purchase and lease something up and then turn around and sell it. So I do both of them because they really operate in tandem as they can. And that's what I love about retail is I can look at a shopping center or development and say, this is where a burger shop would go, this is where a nail salon would go, and you can replicate it, whether it's for a developer or for an existing shopping center.
And with those, it sounds like part of that package is that it does replicate itself, where there's often 3 to 5 of the sort of the core tenants come in together to create the framework, sort of from the national side, and then there's the infill with the local operators, and I guess that's part of the database recommendations that you're making, because you know exactly what the nationals want. They have well-established guidelines. You know, this one's 10,000 square feet. This
Mhm.
one's needs to be an end cap. This, then you know who's the inline, and which bank and which drugstore and which fast food, and then you have pizza and you have deli or what other things that come in that are often more local in nature.
Exactly. Yes, for sure.
Where do you typically get that information? So with your team, does everybody have access to the same database? Do you share a database, or do you go to a third
Yeah,
party for that?
we've got a shared database. And so what I did when I worked at Cushman and Wakefield, I always like to take advice. If two different people give me the same advice and they're not connected, I typically go, this is good advice to take. So when I was at Cushman and Wakefield, they mentioned something like, wouldn't it be amazing if we had a database of every category that there is of pizza shops, dry cleaning, whatever that is, a database broken up by industry. So it took mental note. Okay, they say that'd be a good idea. Then I went to Collier's, and then one of their top retail people said the exact same thing. Wouldn't it be amazing if there was a database that had every pizza shop, every dry cleaner, everything? So I was like, okay, two people, top of their game in this market, not related. That's not like they were brainstorming ideas randomly. Both of them say this is a good idea. So I started inventing a way that I build my databases, which is basically I'll go through the main core and categories for retail commercial real estate, subcategories within that, and then I will go and build the databases that fit there. So here's every bagel shop in this market. We're in Colorado, and we're in San Francisco and Birmingham. So I just pulled all the restaurants in each one of those markets, and then we have certain ways that we'll go after them to get in contact with them. So the way we build our databases is the same when you're part of the group. And the categories that we do is everything, like I said, it's a franchise model. Okay. So we do it in every single state the same way. And then for the nationals, we'll use different platforms like Retail Lease Track, but we'll still break it into those categories. So if I'm working on a development project, I know it's going to be a good fit for a hair salon, for instance. I'm going to reach out to all the nationals and all of the locals so that it's synergistic and it's done by category versus random shotgun cold calling.
But we have to talk more 'cause, with RealNext, we have a platform with our CRM technology to create an incredibly efficient shared database with privacy and controls that you can manage who has access to what and who can edit what. So, because you don't want people corrupting your data, you want to make sure it's managed, controlled, and tight. But
Yeah,
it also then can drive into the deal management and collaboration. So we should
for
definitely
sure.
talk further, because we've worked with a number of different national practices that drive that type of collaboration as you're growing. It seems like something that is an opportunity. Now,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I was hoping to connect on some of that stuff too with James because I know he's
yep,
heavily involved in AI stuff. And
exactly.
AI, I mean, if people can learn how to leverage technology in this industry, this industry in commercial real estate, lovingly I say this, is one step above chiseling things into a rock. So if you can learn commercial real estate and then you learn technology and AI, there's not anything that can really set you back at this point. The opportunity is massive in this industry as you start to see these transitions, which is what I love about what you guys are doing and what EXP is doing is they're getting ahead of the curve right now, which will, in my opinion, massively disrupt the industry by using things like RealNext and other platforms like that that really change the way things are done. I met two, maybe three commercial real estate agents in my career that used a CRM.
It's just incredible that
Mhm.
you can get business done, but it's not for long. I mean, there are
Yep.
people that will maybe finish their career with a yellow pad, but everybody coming in is technology enabled, and the clients are expecting it and demanding it more. They need
Exactly.
efficiency, they need speed, they need you to very quickly identify the prospects, be able to reach out to them very efficiently, and be able to run that leasing process. So they're not carrying that until you can figure out the data. You don't want to do the research once you're hired. You want to be able to pitch them. That's what's going to get you hired. It's like, I have the target market. I can press a button and I can broadcast your availabilities to them in a minute and
Yep.
start the dialogue and have the marketing logged.
Exactly.
We're also, we have, uh, I think in your history, some training and books. So maybe just before we open up for questions, and please, anyone who has a question, please chime in. But tell us about any training and writing that the group should be aware of. And
Yeah, I mean, my main thing again is I do consulting work. Commercial real estate ties into that heavily because it's a major wealth generator and it's strategic planning, especially on the retail sector of how does this person enter into a market. But a big factor of what I do is I do business consulting for people making companies, growing their companies and stuff like that. And I do a lot of motivational speaking as well. I've done events from with John Maxwell to Les Brown to Floyd Mayweather to the Cardones to everything in between. I'm also a best-selling author. I've written multiple different businesses. For instance, I made one that was spotlighted in Times Square in New York City, which was basically recreating, if anyone's seen it, the TV show Undercover Billionaire, which is where you get dropped in the middle of nowhere, you don't use your name, and you go and you start a business from nothing. So I created a business from nothing. I didn't turn it into $1 million, so I don't want to overstate that, but it was still pretty cool. I started a business from nothing, not using my credibility, hardly anything, and then turned it into a six-figure business very shortly after, and was able to go and take that model and show it to other people so that they could go and generate money without having to buy like any real estate or anything. So I'm heavily involved in the business consulting world. I've written multiple different books, and really my main focus is I think our biggest challenge, or maybe not our biggest challenges, but one of our biggest challenges is income inequality and trying to bridge that gap between poverty and people that know how to make money. And that gap, from what I can see, is based on knowledge and collaboration. So I don't claim to know it all, but what I try to write about, what I try to teach, and what I try to consult is that it's everything's a recipe. As soon as you know how the processes work in a company and financials, whatever it is, they can be replicated. And I try to consult and teach people that. And also I try to model it and go and learn it myself versus just being on stage and talking about how to, you know, make money without a clue how to run a business. So I try very hard to practice what I preach. And you see that a lot in the books and in the keynotes and consulting work I do.
That's excellent. You're so willing to share and teach and help others become successful. The group that you have now, I think you said it's in 7 states. Where are you at? Where can you help? And where are you looking to grow?
So we're looking to grow into Texas. I mean, that's the next major market. We already got some deals trading paper out there. Utah will be after this. Right now, as it stands, we're in South Carolina, Colorado, Alabama, Georgia, everywhere, because our headquarters is in Idaho. Every person that's part of my group gets licensed in Idaho. That's where I'm from, and a majority of the past clients that I've had are in Idaho. And it helps me teach people how to do the processes correctly. We're in California as well as Montana. Utah, Arizona, and Texas will be next, and then probably Florida. And the major reason for that and why I'm trying to be strategic in picking these states is I want to make sure that the real estate directors with my people are about the same. The investors are the same, and then the overall demographics are about the same when it comes to growth patterns, because it makes it a lot easier if I say, hey, our headquarters is in Idaho. That's a similar buyer palette as Texas and also Arizona. It makes it easier to be synergistic and represent the real estate director in multiple states than it is for me to say, hey, our headquarters is in Idaho and we're going to have the same people in New York. That just doesn't work that way. Even though the model can be replicated out there, it's not as synergistic. So we will be next.
Yeah, another key difference that you just bring up is that sort of that urban retail is a different game than smaller city or smaller town or suburban. Manhattan retail is a whole different world, or like a Rodeo Drive, or the sort of the main streets across the country, a little bit different than,
Yeah.
and a different level of expertise and understanding what those clients are looking for.
Exactly. And different decision makers at that point. It can still be replicated because, category killer list of these are the people that are in here in the categories that need to service, the local populations about the same, but the decision makers aren't. So I want to make sure that everything's synergistic and we're in the main 4 states.
Excellent. So why don't we open it up? We have a few minutes for anyone that has questions. I'm sure Melissa's anxious to help all of you. And if you have retail people in your group or resources that you know about that would like to become part of a national retail practice, it's a good time to connect. Keith, anything? Max, see you guys up in my front and center here.
Am I front and center?
Yeah, on my screen you are. You always are front and center.
Right.
You're always front and center, Keith.
We need everybody else here to turn on their video. What do you think?
I do. I mean, I can't be the only one showing my face on here.
Yeah.
So
Well, coming from, I came in late. Did you talk at all about supporting the developer?
what do you mean by supporting the developer?
A developer comes to you and said, hey, I'm going to build this great, wonderful little thing here in this part of the country, and I want you to bring me tenants. How do you support me? I think I heard you say one statement about you could tell them what's missing and what they should do based on what it is they're building. Is there anything else you want to add?
I think a lot of times when it comes to development, it also comes to knowing what the rental rates are in that area, and also the delivery conditions, and helping pull those comps, which are difficult to find, especially subject to whatever market you're in. If you're in a non-disclosure state or a disclosure state, knowing that delivery condition and what's fair market value is very tricky. And then knowing the land basis cost of what's typically normal is very tricky as well. So for instance, if I look at just Idaho as an example, for a new development to make sense, the land cannot be more than typically $25 per square foot, sometimes 30, $32 per square foot. That's pad site ready, utilities to site ready for anything to break ground on it. And anything above that, the developer is not going to be able to make sense with the economics, and the rent is not going to be sensible for the tenant to pay, and the deal is not going to pencil. And that's also subject to the delivery conditions. So knowing those comps are massive to being able to help with that process. And the big thing that I see with development is you have to stick your money where your mouth is a lot of times, especially if you're helping developers identify sites, because everybody could waste a lot of time real quickly. I know that, this developer over here is not going to buy this 1 acre pad site unless I can bring enough interest that the banks are willing to finance them enough money to close on the property. So you make a lot of money or not very much money at all. But those comps are very critical. I should be closing on a deal in about the next month that I have to put together a pro forma on today of what's a purchase price, what's the lease rate, and what's the delivery, and what's the cap rate to help support that developer in making that argument to the bank that they should get lending on it based on the interest we've generated so far.
I think one of the things we didn't talk about is the going through the approval process, and how the agent can also be guiding in advising and supporting the work going to get that land approved for the work, and knowing what's changing in the market. That would be the advance warning to the grocery or the other store that, okay, your next location should be here because the road network is changing, and they can't be everywhere. And since it's such a local business, having those eyes and ears on the ground to know in advance when something's coming or when something was announced can be the quick trigger that gets somebody there first. Because once that is announced and known, then it becomes highly competitive. But if you can be the first one to let the client know that something's changing, there's a new development. Keith, you're working on a project that we've talked about. When there's massive new development in an area, it just opens up and it transforms who would want to locate there. And to be the first one to let those retailers or those other retail developers know about it. Why don't we just go one more round, see if anyone has any questions, and then let everybody get back to work. Although this is work as well. It's good work. It's good knowledge, good information sharing. And
Hey, Mallisa, are you heading up the retail this time?
No,
Product Specialty Mastermind?
I don't think so at this point. They wanted me to come and give some information on stuff like that, but they said they wanted to transition some of the, give every committee a different face for everything.
Right.
So, but I still do run CRE 101, and that is every Wednesday bi-weekly. And today being one of those, and that's at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So we cover a heavy amount of stuff in there, including development.
Did you get your contact information? Everyone have your contact information, Mallisa? If you want to put it in the chat, if they don't, or
I'll drop it here. So
there you go. Perfect.
info@mjpcre.com, and that goes over to my support team that can will coordinate a response on there. Got a lot of people that will send me over sites. I can't work on every project. I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, and we're getting pretty intense with what we're doing. But I help a lot of people look at, okay, this is what I would do if I was working on the project, or this is how I would work with it. So if anyone wants me to look at something, I'm happy to kind of dive in and look at it. I might not be able to be super hands-on exactly myself on it, because we're trying to make sure we really control the brand and that we don't overspread ourselves. But if anyone has something that they want to talk about, email this over, and then we can figure out how we can collaborate, whether that is me personally getting involved or just giving some tidbits on how I'd work on something. So if anyone wants to connect, info@mjpcre.com is a great way to do that.
Well, that's a great way to wrap up. Appreciate that. Appreciate your time, Elizabeth. Appreciate everyone being here. Thank you all for joining, and contact Mallisa if you need any help on the retail side of things. Great resource for the organization.
Perfect. All right. Thanks so much.
Afternoon.
All right. Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Mallisa. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
All right. Thank you.